Hey, it's Lauren from Rustic Honey, and today I want to invite you along as I talk about all things sourdough. Last year, I challenged myself to use my sourdough starter every single week of the year, and I'm going to share with you all of the tips I learned along the way and some simple recipes to get you started too. So step into my kitchen with me this week, and we'll get busy baking. All right, so today I'm going to run you through some of my favorite recipes as we talk about sourdough, and I can give you some of the tips along the way and also share yummy ways to use your sourdough starter. Now, I'm starting off this week with some waffles for breakfast because I just pulled my sourdough starter out of the refrigerator and I need to discard it before I feed it and get it really bubbly for my next sourdough project for the week. I actually love some of the discard recipes that I've used over the last year. And I've created this one on my blog, and I'll link all of these below. Again, all of the recipes will be in a blog post for you, so it'll be easy and accessible. But waffles are a great way, and so are pancakes, to use up some discards so that you can get down to kind of the bottom of your jar and be ready to feed again for your next project. So the discard recipes often use a different kind of leavening agent, as so you can add in baking powder or baking soda, and it's going to help with your rise and the fluffiness of the product without having the sourdough starter actually active. Okay, you may be thinking, back up here. I don't even have a starter that's happy and ready to go, so I need to know more about the sourdough starter. So I started mine over a year ago, and I used a tutorial that I found super helpful, so I'm going to link it in my blog post as well so that you have all of the information that you need in one place. Now, I do use a scale sometimes, and that is something that I feel like is helpful, but it's not necessary either. You do want to use glass to store your sourdough starter in, and you do want to feed it at least the amount that's in there. So you saw the very small area at the bottom of that jar. I fed it just as much as was in there, and now it's going to hopefully double in size. And that's why I went ahead and put that mark on my jar. And then you want to cover your jar with something breathable. And this is something I didn't know the very first time I started sourdough, but over the course of time, I've learned this. So when I'm storing it in the fridge, I leave the ring on with this mason jar lid, just normal. But then when it comes out, I'll use a piece of cloth or often a paper towel because that's the easiest thing. If it gets dirty eventually, then I'll just toss it. But it's nice and breathable, so it lets in the air, which helps trap in the yeast. And that's what actually, like that natural yeast is what gives it that rise. Okay, so this morning I made the waffles and then I cleaned up the kitchen. I went ahead and fed my sourdough starter after it came to room temperature, so around lunchtime. You don't have to wait for it to come to room temperature, but timing wise, it works for me to feed it around noon if I want to put something together that evening before bed. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. As you can see, it's so much healthier looking now. It's lighter, it's got lots of bubbles. That's what I'm going for. And I am going to mix together some English muffins for tomorrow morning. So excuse my lighting, this is at nighttime, so got all my kitchen lights on in this video, but that's what the sourdough starter looks like as we're bringing things together. I think when people think of sourdough, they instantly think about the artisan loaves, the really pretty loaves of bread, and we are going to get to that. But I will say I really enjoy making so many things for my family that are sourdough related that aren't a loaf of bread. So English muffins is one of those recipes, and that's what I'm throwing together tonight. I love these quick breads. They fit my lifestyle, sometimes an artisan loaf through the week, although I have found one that works really well for my busy schedule, is a little bit more time consuming. I have to do a little bit more thinking. But if I can just prep something really quick the night before and have it ready to go, like English muffins, a quick bread like this is so handy for meal planning. And here you can see the next morning, that was a very awesome, healthy starter because it doubled in size overnight. I am then adding to my English muffins the next morning. You just add in some baking soda, some salt, some honey, and we're going to give that a mix. Now, I've tried a couple different recipes for English muffins, so I'm going to link both because they're both great. I've had success with both of them. This one is slightly more labor intensive because I'm going to lay it out and then cut the pieces as you would for biscuits. And the other recipe I follow is a little bit more liquidy, and you actually pour the English muffins into the pan and then flip them over like a really thick pancake almost. So this one's slightly more like biscuits, but honestly, they both tasted really good. So I recommend both of them and have used the other recipe multiple times too. This recipe is said to put it in your stand mixer and mix everything together, but I was just being lazy and I didn't want to go to the trouble of making another mess. So I could have mixed this together a little bit better, but it obviously worked in the ingredients just fine because everything tasted great. They just didn't probably roll out as pretty as they could have. But if I can offer you any encouragement, it's that you shouldn't just wait until it's perfect. Like, don't expect yourself to be perfect with sourdough in the beginning. It's going to take a lot of practice. And especially if you haven't been baking breads or doing homemade things at all, don't be discouraged right away. And, I love that saying that says, you're not failing if you're learning. So, you might bake a couple loaves of bread that are more like hockey pucks, and that can happen in the very beginning with your sourdough starter. Don't be discouraged. Don't hang your head and think you can't do this. If I can do this, you can do this. So hang in there and try multiple recipes and keep going. And it doesn't always have to be pretty to be delicious. Another thing I've noticed over the course of my journey in sourdough is that some people are super precise with their sourdough while others are just a lot more loosey-goosey with it. And I think you just have to know what works best for you. If it works best for you to be precise in the beginning or off and on be more precise with feeding your sourdough starter so that you really feel like you have a good grasp of what it looks like, then do that. It's kind of like, I feel like it's kind of like counting calories. Like in the beginning, you may really need to count calories if you're, working on weight loss or fitness to understand your food better. But then once you get into the rhythm of things, then you don't really have to do that anymore to be able to eyeball all of the things in the kitchen. It's like that with cooking too. So I feel like just practice makes perfect. Just keep showing up and trying all of the things. That is exactly why I challenged myself to use my sourdough every week for a year. And I learned so much. I'm so glad that I did that as kind of a New Year's resolution. Okay, now we're just going to stick in our English muffins for about 10 minutes into the oven to finish cooking through in the center. Now, I did those in my cast iron skillet, as you saw, which I love the flavor of that, and I love the crispiness you get on the edges, but use the equipment that you have. I do have a very large griddle that I'll pull out for pancakes, so making this many English muffins at once probably would have been a lot faster to use that large griddle, but either way, use what you have, and you'll learn along the way what works best for you. I'm going to save my bacon grease to the side for another time, and we're going to make some eggs and pull together these yummy breakfast sandwiches. If you are early on in your sourdough journey, then I would highly recommend trying something like English muffins or biscuits because I think you'll get your confidence up that you can make something delicious from your starter, even if your starter is not perfect yet. And I think English muffins was one of the first things that I tried. Everything seemed so intimidating in the beginning, but these recipes come together so easily now. The hardest part for me is thinking of what I want to make in the morning to put the dough together the night before. That's the only thing bad about sourdough is you have to think ahead a little bit further in advance. But that's also where the refrigerator comes in. I feel like in our modern world, it's so much easier to keep a sourdough starter on hand and ready to go because we have refrigerators in our kitchens. So honestly, there's some weeks that I may not use my sourdough starter at all, and it can live in the fridge. It'll be just fine. There's a lot of weeks that I will pull out the sourdough starter towards the end of the work week and feed it and just kind of let it sit out for a day or two. So that way it's perfectly active and bubbly so that Friday night, if I want to put together a dough so that we can have a yummy Saturday morning breakfast like this, then I can do that. So I think it's just a matter, again, of you just, holding your hand to the fire, getting in the kitchen and experimenting because everybody's schedule is going to look different. I am at home on Monday mornings to do sandwiches like this, and I know that's probably not the case for a lot of women, but it doesn't mean that you can't do sourdough. You can work outside of the home Monday through Friday, and I guarantee you that you can still enjoy sourdough starter in your home once a week if you want, or twice a week, however you want to bake on the weekends. It can be tailored to any schedule. I really do think that, especially with the use of refrigeration. Another thing I learned after doing sourdough for over a year is that you really don't have to have all the fancy tools. Are some of them nice to have? Of course, but I really was able to make do with the things I have in my kitchen, and I may have more than the average person anyway, because I have always loved to bake. So I've always had a bench scraper and a rolling pin and a cast iron Dutch oven, things like that. I already have in my kitchen, but I would challenge you to see what you have that you could use. I have used a very sharp knife instead of a lame for over a year, And instead of Banneton baskets, you'll see I had used bowls with just a tea towel, and those things worked just fine. I was able to improve my baking skills without all the fancy gadgets. I just wanted to encourage you with that you don't have to invest a lot of money to get started with sourdough. Like, just start with what you have. Use the flour you have in the cabinet, and you most likely have running water. So just start there. And then as you learn, then you can develop your skills and do it how you'd like. Now, while I was doing all of my morning chores, I left the English muffins out to cool on a wire rack. Once they were completely cooled, you saw that I cut them in half before freezing them. I wanted to put them in a freezer bag, and I thought if they're already pre-sliced, then it's kind of like the ones you buy at the store. They're ready to go, and all I'll have to do is just let them come to room temperature or warm them up for a few seconds and then stick them in the toaster to make a yummy sandwich any morning of the week, which is super handy. I love having freezer things ready to go. If you are into freezer meals, let me know in the comments below, because that was another video I'm hoping to do in the future, would be some freezer meals before this baby gets here later this spring. Okay, so you saw me feeding my starter there. Again, I think I fed it late afternoon actually to see if it would get bubbly by that evening to make some bread, or to prep some bread for the next day, I should say. Now, my favorite artisan loaf is from Acts of Sourdough on Instagram. I think her name's Courtney. I mentioned her in my last video, and I found her recipe on her blog. So again, I'm linking to that one today. Over the course of the last year, you can imagine, I tried a lot of different bread recipes, and this one is just my absolute favorite because it is so easy. There's zero fuss to it. Honestly, there's basically zero kneading, and I just throw it together the night before, and I go about my evening, and every hour I'll do a couple stretch and folds, which I'll show you here in a minute, but it just comes together so simply. You just do your sourdough starter, some water, flour, and salt, get it mixed together, and it's a real wet dough, and then you let it sit for about an hour, and then you do 4 stretch and folds, then you cover it up, let it sit another hour, do another set of stretch and folds. And that's kind of the fun part, really. I love messing with it for some reason. And towards the end, after you do a few stretch and folds, it's super smooth on top. You cover it up and go to bed and let it do its thing overnight. And it just amazes me how much it grows. So it's kind of smooth like this at the very end of my stretch and folds for the night. And the other thing I like about Courtney on her Instagram is she makes it seem really approachable. She's like, if you have time for 2 stretch and folds, do that. But if you have time for 4, do that. So again, I like her approach to sourdough. It's very practical and relatable. So I really would recommend watching her on her channel. And again, that's Acts of Sourdough. I'm going to put all of those helpful links below, along with some podcasts I've listened to. All of those things are going to be linked down below for you. And the next morning, I'm pulling this out to make bread. I made one in a loaf pan and I made one in a Dutch oven. Now, another thing that I've learned is that the Dutch oven creates steam around the bread, and that's what creates its artisan crusty loaf exterior that you often see. And so if you don't have a Dutch oven, you're not going to get that same effect no matter what you have. That is one tool that you will need if you want to create a loaf like that. Otherwise, it still tastes amazing. The texture on the outside will just be slightly different. I'm also adding tension to my loaf here, which is an important part of the process. And again, speaking of Acts of Sourdough, she has great videos on that, different techniques, and she'll make you feel really comfortable when shaping your loaf. Now, I'm laughing at myself in this video because I have a new lame. And like I told you before, for a year, I've just used this really sharp knife, and I finally got myself a lame, and now I feel like the learning process has started over again because I just felt like I botched it completely. But it's a learning curve with the new lame, apparently. Okay, so this is fast forward a while. I had to preheat the Dutch oven, lay the loaf on parchment paper, put it into the Dutch oven, and then you bake it with the lid on for a while. Then you take the lid off, and then it comes out. Now, one thing I did not know for the longest time is that you cannot cut into a hot loaf of sourdough bread. Just don't do it. It's so tempting. It smells delicious. You want to cut into it and let the butter melt, but don't do it because it's going to lose its moisture on the inside. So you're going to want to let it cool for at least an hour before you slice into it. Another thing I learned is to cut the loaf in half and then stand it up like this to cut your pieces. I don't know why I never thought of that, but it's a game changer. Now, I do love to use my loaf throughout the week for sandwiches. I often have it for breakfast in a skillet. I'll just have it with my egg and a little butter, and it crisps up around the edges. That's one way I love to eat the loaf. Otherwise, we make sandwiches with it, mostly toasted sandwiches. Let me know how you like to use your sourdough loaf throughout the week. I love to know what people are actually using their bread for and what they're making for dinner throughout the week. I find that super fascinating and inspiring, and I hope that you're sticking with me because we are now moving on to dinner. We are going to make some steak fajita tacos, so I am whipping up some discard tortillas. This is, I think, maybe a day or two after that. So my discard was looking a little sad. As you saw in the beginning, it was a lot more just liquefied, not as bubbly. So this was the perfect recipe to put it together again that night. So I had too much discard. That was also a problem. So sometimes I will split between two jars. That way I don't have to waste anything. And I will feed both of them and let them get bubbly, and then I'll stick them in my fridge. Then another time when I want to pull them out, I will use a recipe that involves a lot of discard, maybe like a pizza dough crust, something like that. So I'm just kind of nursing these back together. I will use my scale too every once in a while if I feel like I really need to amp up my sourdough starter. And I will start by doing 100 grams of flour and then about 100 grams of water. And that method has seemed to really work for me to bulk up my starter. Now, while my tortilla dough is resting and I've just fed the sourdough starter, I'm going to let those rise, and I'm hoping by tonight I can make something again for tomorrow morning. I don't usually make this many things in a week, I'll just say that too. I happen to make a few more things this week so that I could share some of my favorite recipes with you. So don't feel like you have to do all of these things in a week. Sometimes I don't, like I said, sometimes there's weeks I don't make anything, and sometimes there's weeks I may only make bread and that's all that I do. So don't feel like you have to have this rigid schedule and make all of these things. But I'm just chopping up onion here. I've marinated some steaks that I'm going to take out to my husband on the grill. I'm loving this weather because we get to do a little bit more grilling around here. And it's been about 30 minutes for my tortilla dough, so it's ready to cut into. I'm just going to divide it into, I think, about 12 equal amounts. It just depends on how large you want your tortillas. I will say I ran out of parchment paper. And I don't know how that happened because that's like a sin in our house. No, we don't run out of parchment paper around here, but apparently my pregnancy brain forgot to order it the last time. So anyway, I'm just rolling these out on the counter. Again, use what you have. I have flour and that's all we need. So I'm rolling these as thin as I can possibly get them. Sometimes I will use parchment paper or wax paper to get them even thinner. But as you can see, I did a pretty good job. You can see how thin that is. And I will put these in my cast iron with a little bit of oil. Again, I'm only doing one at a time so that I can honestly just cook one. It just takes a few seconds on one side, flip it, and maybe 30 seconds again on the other side. It does not take that long, maybe a minute per tortilla. So as I'm cooking one in the skillet, I'm also over to the side rolling another one out. And as they're coming out of the cast iron, I'm just stacking them up so they stay nice and pliable for dinner. And they're just so delicious. There's nothing like a homemade tortilla. Even if you don't get into sourdough, homemade tortillas are delicious. I will say I have not tried to freeze them, and I know some friends that have. I really need to try to freeze them. I know you can. And that would be an easy thing to have ready in your freezer at all times. So the tacos came together with some sauteed onions, a little cheese. I am looking forward to garden days when we have like pico de gallo ready to go. But we do have some candied jalapenos still in our pantry from last year. So that was the perfect topping for our tacos. And as you can see, I brought out my cell phone camera so you can have a little bit better light here in my kitchen tonight. But that really helped my sourdough come to life. So it is super bubbly again after being so liquidy. It is super healthy and ready to go again for tonight. And I am going to make bagel dough tonight so that I can have bagels in the morning ready to show you. This is a fun one. Ooh. See how that is floating? That is another tip that I learned along the way, is that if you add water to your sourdough starter in a bowl and the sourdough starter floats, then you know you have an active, healthy starter. So that's a fun little tip if you are in the beginning of this and you're like, I don't know if this is bubbly enough or if this is working. Is my starter healthy? That is something I learned along the way too. So bagel dough, it sounds so intimidating to make bagels. I read through some directions and I thought this is going to be hard, but it was so easy. You literally mix up the ingredients. I am fortunate enough to have a KitchenAid mixer with a dough hook, so I just turn it on while I'm doing dishes And as soon as it comes together in a ball, you just cover it. And I put it again on top of my dishwasher. I think I mentioned this in a video before. The area above my dishwasher at night stays nice and warm, even in the winter, even when it's snowing and icy here. So find a warm place. Sometimes I even put my dough in our dining room because it is closer to the furnace and it's a little bit warmer in there. So anyway, find a warm place for your dough to rise. This is the next morning. I got up early just so that I could get in the kitchen and get these bagels made before I had to do the school drop and the whole work day thing. So I let those rise while I was doing all of those things. And when I came back, I decided to get them ready to boil and make their topping and get the baking together. So this is a cinnamon crunch bagel topping, and again, this is just my life. I forgot to set out the butter, so it wasn't room temperature. So I attempted to melt it, but then it got a little bit hot. So my crumble was not as perfect, again, as it could have been. But we're not looking for perfect around here, right? Please let me know you're with me in the comments below, because that is not real life. I will say these are also the ugliest bagels I think I've ever made, but that's how it goes when you're trying to make a video and share with your friends. And then you're like, why are these so ugly? It's real life. So what you're going to do is boil the bagels. Again, this all seems so complicated, but I promise you, if I can do this, you can do this. In the water, you're going to add sugar and you're going to add baking soda, and that's what helps create the actual exterior of a bagel. It's a little bit of a different texture on the outside. And from what I've read, that is what that process is about. So don't skip that part. But we're going to add the cinnamon crunch to the top of the bagels. I'm assuming this same recipe would work for any kind of bagel you wanted to make. If you wanted to add Parmesan cheese or everything but the bagel seasoning on top, then you could do that at that stage before you bake them. Then they bake for about 25 minutes, and then let them cool for a while before you cut into them. You don't have to wait an hour. You can still eat these while they're warm. I had some whipped cream cheese on mine, and oh, these are so good. If you love cinnamon crunch bagels, you've got to try these. This is a fun one. So I have so many recipes to share with you, and they're all over on the blog. I did my top 10 simple sourdough recipes that I have used over and over again in my sourdough over a year journey here. And I hope that they inspire you to get in the kitchen, make a sourdough starter, mess it up if you need to. There's some bonus recipes that are not shown in this video, like the Pop-Tarts that were in one of my recent videos, and some muffins. So jump over there, grab that. If you don't have a starter, I'm going to link to that too for you. But I hope that today inspired you to get started with sourdough or continue your journey along the way and improve your skills. And if you're new here, I hope you consider subscribing. I love to share rustic recipes and country living from our century farmhouse. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you back here again soon.